From Levittown to Cambridge, Gerry, maybe you can talk a little bit about that's an interesting journey. Long Island. Everybody that's from Long Island always talks about how great Long Island is, and I don't disagree. I've had a number of trips out there, and actually lived in Lake Placid for a number of years, so I can appreciate Lake Placid. But talk a little bit about that journey.
Well, my wife's from upstate. You might as well be from Canada if you lived in Lake Placid. You know, you might as well be a time zone away if you think upstate New York is Long Island. No, listen. You know, people. You know, your memory's always a little bit strange. When you're there, you hate it, and then when you leave it, you miss it. And so, you know, the best thing about Long Island is that at some point you get to leave. It's great beaches, great delis, decent amount of personality, you know, pretty formative time. I grew up in a town that was, you know, essentially the first suburb. Every house was exactly the same, about 14 yards from your neighbor across a driveway. So like Monopoly houses, all the same right next to each other. And we moved there, you know, maybe mid to late 50s, mid 50s when my father got out of the Korean War. And so we weren't first, you know, we were 6-7 years after the founding of the town. So it was great. All cops, firemen, plumbers, electricians, construction workers, people who really worked with their hands, if you know what I mean. So wrenches, guns, you know, there weren't slide rules and protractors. They worked with their hands. And so it definitely developed a certain mindset and mentality of that generation, and was fortunate to be there. I loved it. And I miss elements of it for sure.
We're talking with Gerry Bryne, and this is actually the first edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host, and we're going to talk with Gerry a little bit about defense and going back to Cambridge, being at Notre Dame, and a variety of subjects. So first of all, thank you for coming aboard. The idea here is to maybe talk specifically about something that a lot of conversations cover a lot of ground, and we want to be a little more specific in nature and sort of talk a little bit about defense. I guess the first question is that being a Blue Town community, Levittown, I guess the term aggressive would probably bring to mind the idea of when you pick up a short stick or a long stick. And I guess, how did you start with being a defenseman? How did that all get going?
Well, you know, I kept on getting cut from all these sports that I was really interested in. And no, I you know, the town where I'm from, at one point, it still may be true that there's more Long Island Lacrosse Hall of Fame members from Levittown than any other town. And that's a tall statement when you think about Ward Melville or Setauket or Garden City or Manhasset or Cold Spring Harbor, you know, any of the real kind of seminal towns. But I think it started pretty early, even though it was a very blue-collar town at the time. I think it was just another thing for people to try. That being said, my oldest brother didn't play. He went to Holy Trinity High School. My older brother, Thomas, became a New York City fireman. My middle brother, Steve, started in like sophomore or junior year at Levittown Division, which is the public school in town. And, you know, he became a great player, arguably one of the probably 5 or 6 best defensemen who's ever played at Virginia. Won the Schmeiser Award. He was a first-team All-American on the national team. So he started really late. And during those awkward 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, my awkward phase lasted a little bit longer than most. Some would say maybe it's still going on. But my mom basically chastised me into trying out for lacrosse because I wasn't playing a sport. And I was bummed. I went to Chaminade and I kept on getting cut from all these sports. And so I tried it my junior year, and I played attack, but didn't play. I was on the team, and my high school coach happened to be from Levittown as well. And so there's 100% chance that he kept me because he knew, there was a genetic connection between my older brother and myself. And so that's the only reason they kept me. And then I basically, because my brother was my idol, and he became a starting defenseman at Virginia as a freshman and sophomore, and I just wanted to emulate him. And so that's how it happened.
Is Steve still coaching in Cleveland?
Steve is still, I think he helps out in Shaker Heights for sure.
I know that we played them a couple years ago, and it was fun watching the way those guys played. Just a different. My short-term question is, why is Long Island so good at lacrosse?
I think it was adopted early. If you look at any of the areas, part of it was, I think, the affluent communities picked it up, mostly because maybe you went to a boarding school or you went to a private school, and there was a higher probability that sport had been introduced. So that was also true of the more affluent communities on Long Island. So you look at why Long Island developed that way, it was probably because somebody moved to that area in the early 20th century and came from, either they became indoctrinated with the sport because they went to one of the elite boarding schools in New England and then went to college and played, and then worked in Manhattan and settled in a certain community on Long Island. Then it kind of flourished from there, just like in Syracuse. It's because of Syracuse proximity to the Onondaga Reservation. In Baltimore, probably the same reason, the private day schools and people who enrolled in certain elite colleges would bring the sport back when they got exposed to it. So I think that's kind of an explanation of why, but then it also kind of flourished in the blue collar communities as well.
Did being tall and large like your brother, did that sort of push you into being a defenseman maybe versus being a power midi or something?
There was nothing, when I enrolled in freshman year in college, I was 6'2", 139. So,
I didn't know that.
My nickname was the Rubber Chicken. And so, yeah, I don't think I was using power, unless the power of a witty barb or a joke is powerful. So no, I kind of just stumbled on to defense because my junior year, my first year playing organized lacrosse, I didn't play a second, and I didn't like to watch, and my brother kind of gave me some pointers, and it was much more natural for some reason. And I had worked on my stick, and so I was never going to be fleet of foot. And so I worked on kind of my IQ and my hand speed, and my ability to get the ball off the ground became attributes, and were always attributes. In Levittown, they have curbs. And so that's how I learned to scoop the ball and handle the ball, down low, just being able to roll it off the ground and have it rebound off the curb. So you kind of just, I wanted to play, and that looked like the best path.
Your soul as a coach, your soul as a defender, your principles, where did they start? Is it something you picked up, developed, or was there somebody in your background that sort of grounded you into what you wanted to be able to do, or has it been an evolving process?
Well, I don't think, I was a takeaway defender. My brother was one of the great takeaway defenders of all time, and he kind of revolutionized the position. If you look at this continuum of like Mark Greenberg, I'm about to say Hank Greenberg, Mark Greenberg from Johns Hopkins to my brother Steve to Dave Petramala, is like a continuum of guys who kind of revolutionized the position. And so I wanted to emulate my brother. So I became a guy who liked to take the ball away. And in the mid 80s, even until the late 90s, when Coach Tierney started doing his slide and recovery defense, there wasn't a lot of team defense. I mean, if you look at the NBA back then, it wasn't, the concept of team defense was try not to let your guys score. And so until Coach Tierney started doing, his philosophy on slide and recovery, there was no defense. It was just
Right.
you got put on an island. You were angry if anybody came and helped you because it was almost an indictment of your inability to guard somebody. So it was kind of impugning your cover ability if someone had to come and help you. So, Coach Tierney kind of shifted that whole mindset around support. And so probably indirectly, what Coach Tierney was doing, even though I never really studied it, I was aware of it. And then when I got back to coaching, most coaches are control freaks to some level. And, that seemed because the sticks were being shaped in a certain way and the pockets were strung in a certain way, the ball just didn't come out. So there wasn't really to try to teach somebody to be a takeaway defenseman. It seemed to be a futile exercise. And so I kind of went the other way, dialed in an element of control and teaching discipline and teaching approaches and teaching really conservative checking, teaching language. All of that stuff kind of probably came out of my professional career, where if you're managing 20 to 30 people, you better have some consistent values and expectations and clarity so you can have an element of consistency. So it probably came out of there as much as anything.
Amherst College, you went to Amherst and played before you
I went to UMass Amherst. I couldn't get into Amherst College.
That's right. I apologize.
Okay.
4 years there, and then on to the NLL. Where was your connection? What was your first connection to Kevin at Notre Dame? Because you spent 16 years and 2 different stints at Notre Dame.
Yeah, my brother Steve and Kevin were roommates at Virginia, and so like anything else in life, your network and your friendships and your relationships, they don't happen, strategically. They happen they're just natural, happy happenstance. And so I was working in Manhattan for 2 years, left that, was going to go to England to do the lacrosse abroad, English lacrosse union job. And then Kevin asked me to come out and coach, and I'd be able to go to grad school. And so I went out to South Bend in, early 1989, started classes toward my master's in business, and stayed there for 2.5 years and 3 seasons.
A complete side turn, just curiously, is that Matt Kerwick and you both were at Notre Dame at the same time and both married doctors. Was that a coincidence with Notre Dame?
No, that's just being really smart. He's much better looking than I am. So I think, they saw Dr. Carwick saw a little, good gene pool potentially there, and maybe my wife did as well. So that's just good scouting report by both of us.
Yeah, the correlation I thought was interesting from the staff standpoint. So what did you like about Notre Dame? What is it that, coaching with Kevin over those years? Because obviously you developed your professional reputation there. I think that's fair to say. And I think everybody looks to you. Well, everybody looked to your defense. I can tell you from a camp, I sent my defensive coordinator over to a camp. You were sitting on a golf cart. I asked you to explain to him what basically the premise of your defense was, and literally took 2 minutes. And he walked back to me with his mouth down going, "It's that simple?" It's not that simple, but the point was, the philosophy is don't get beat twice.
Yeah, among other things. So listen, Notre Dame is your first part of your question was, how do you find your way out there and why do you stay? It's it's a tremendous place. Met my wife there. 2 of my children were athletes there, and it's a powerful place. It has a powerful allure. It has a powerful attraction, and gets into your bloodstream and your DNA, and it becomes part of who you are. And so it's never going to stop being that for me by any stretch of the imagination. And so, and the first stint was about kind of getting a degree while coaching.
Right.
And so you get connected there, and I met my future wife there, and then you go off on to do, I worked not in lacrosse, but I continued to play, but that wasn't my living. And then had a chance to circle back in 2006, and had an unbelievable run there. And so, it's hard to explain, as people who go to Notre Dame or spend time there. It's hard to explain its attraction and magnetic pull. But I kind of felt the same thing when I left for Harvard. I felt like this was a great opportunity. It was a great opportunity to build something and create something that had really fully realized its potential. And so, it's one of those things that's hard to explain. But each of those stops in my life have had tremendous impact. Working in New York a bunch of times, traveling a significant amount in my previous professional life around the globe, starting a small business, running small businesses, all that stuff kind of leads you to this moment. It helps you, kind of coming back to your original question, helps, even though you might not be doing lacrosse specific stuff, coaching, but managing people when you have to come and then manage a team of 45 people and a staff of 4 or 5 people, all those skills, all the lessons, the successes and failures all come back and have an impact on how you do what you do. So all of the stops have had huge meaning for me.
In your time frame at Notre Dame, you took a program, you and Kevin both took a program that was, I would say, middle of the pack and became an elite program. Is that lesson helpful in what you're attempting to do now?
Yeah, no, I think, 100%. Listen, Kevin had already been there for, I don't know, he had already been coaching there. We started together in the late 80s, and then I left, and then I came back 15 years later. And during that 15 years, they had been to a Final Four, had earned scholarships, and I think that had, the scholarship effect had kind of an unintended consequence to that. And so, I came in right at the end of that first class of people who had gotten scholarships had graduated. And so, I think the combination of the lessons of that for Kevin and how to manage that transition, which could be difficult once, as some musician once said, money changes everything. And so the lessons that he learned of that, combined with Brian Fisher and I coming in August 2006, and Fisher was coming from Rutgers and had coached at a bunch of different places. I was coming from a Division II school. We brought, I think, like a camp management and a recruiting data management approach to stuff that maybe hadn't been done before and hadn't been done there before. So I think the combination of Kevin's lessons of management from that time period, combined with giving Fish and I some autonomy around certain things, really kind of combined with the growth of clubs and club events right at that time. And in 2007, 2008, the clubs really started taking off. So it was kind of really good timing for a different view of looking at recruiting, a different approach to messaging through video and social media and things like that, combined with Kevin's trust of us. I think all of that kind of came together and had a real positive effect on Notre Dame lacrosse.
Your name was floated a number of times in the last 2 or 3 years at Notre Dame, and obviously at some point you decided Harvard was the choice. Was it a timing thing? It was the right opportunity? Just it had been great to be considered for a lot of places in 13, 14 years, and none of them had been compelling enough or the right timing enough to kind of take that leap. And this one felt, unbelievable city, iconic university, the real hope and support from the administration here. And, it felt like a fun adventure. And, and 13 months later, I think that adventure still is
is energizing myself and our staff, and the lacrosse world has responded appropriately and real interest and advocacy about Harvard and nationally and within our league. So, I think the professional opportunity, the city, the sense of place at a place like Harvard, and my wife's support. She's always supported me, but her also having the ability to look at maybe a change in her career trajectory as well, and so all of those things came together.
I would think it's fairly easy in Boston as a doctor to find a job. I don't think that would be too much of a difficulty.
No.
It'd be like going to Washington, being like a Washington and being a lawyer.
Right.
It's not
Exactly.
not that difficult.
Exactly.
The term now.
Oh, hold on a sec. Keep talking. I'm got somebody here.
No, that's fine. I was going to ask.
This is real, man. This is real life right here.
No, that's perfectly fine. How does the name, you're actually the Frisbee family head coach at Harvard. Is that
I am the Frisbee family head coach at Harvard.
Is that a sponsorship because there's no scholarships in the Ivy League?
No, that's an endowed coaching position.
Okay.
So it's a statement of belief in the program and its importance. It's on one hand, it's a financial statement, but it's really kind of, symbolic of our alumni's engagement in the sport here. There's not too many head coaches in Division I lacrosse whose position is endowed, and so it's a great thing. It's a great thing for the financial stability of lacrosse at Harvard.
There are no scholarships in the Ivy League. Am I correct on that?
There are no scholarships in the Ivy League.
So the fact that you're going to Ivy League already cuts out a certain percentage of folks because of grades and because of opportunity.
Yeah.
But I guess Notre Dame's not a lot different in terms of recruiting, because the fact is that Notre Dame is, academically is as strong, I would think, as strong as the Ivy League schools. But my question is, does the Ivy League create issues from a recruiting standpoint? Are you targeting different kids, or is it you're just going after the same kind of kids?
I'll show you now. I mean, you overlap with certain schools, and there's a real difference between our league and the ACC and the Big Ten. Just the role of the way athletics play on those campuses. They're just as important in the Ivy League. It's just our league is not contingent upon the revenue that those schools generate. And so and so as a result, do we overlap with certain schools that are outside of the Ivy League? Yes, but ultimately those young people and their families are going to decide what kind of experience they want. It's going to be high-end, top 10 Division I level lacrosse. The academic experience is going to be a little bit different. The residential life is going to be a little bit different. All of that stuff. And different for some is better, and different for others is not the same. And so, in general, I don't think there's a school that recruits a higher level student athlete, academically than Harvard. So on one hand, that's a challenge, but I also know that there's enough good kids with those credentials that are going to be attracted to a place like Harvard and other schools in our league. So I don't worry about us filling our roster with kids who we think can compete at the highest level.
Almost like recruiting a service academy. You're going to get a very specific level of kid.
They're going to be they don't wake up one morning and decide they want this. They've wanted this for a long time.
The core subject we wanted to talk to you about is talk about the evolution of defense over the last 10 or 12 years, and first of all, I guess the question is, has defensive guys changed? Has the art of defense changed? And if you're talking to a kid who's 14 or 15 years old and wants to play defense, what are you looking for? And has it changed over the last 5, 6, 7 years? Are you looking for quick guys, stick guys? Has it changed at all in your mind?
Well, there's two questions in there. There's one's about recruiting and
Yes.
One's about defense. And so, I don't think I've changed at all really in the
Okay.
last 13 or 14 years, again, you're open to, you learn things you learn things maybe about what someone else is doing, a piece of terminology or the way to do a drill, and figure out how you can kind of merge that into your core philosophy. Because my whole core philosophy is everybody gets run by, communication is essential, stance is critical, approach is essential, recovery is also essential. Bad things happen a lot, so you got to be prepared for those bad things. And the 5 guys off ball are frankly more important than the 1 guy on ball. And so, teaching that through, I think I have probably 100 videos out on the internet somewhere, like teaching that in a variety of ways and thinking about the 6 or 7 core fundamental skills that you try to teach. And then each of those 6 or 7 things haven't changed. To me, they're fundamental and non-negotiable. And then filling each of those 6 or 7 things underneath with 10 to 20 drills that reinforce it and teach it in a variety of ways. So I don't think I've changed very much relative to since I started at Notre Dame, other than paying attention to maybe what some other schools do and then how they teach it and maybe how it could be relevant to me. I've completely opened my trench coat. Everything that I do is out, and everything that I believe is on dozens of webinars and drills and videos, and it's open for the world to emulate if they would like. From a recruiting standpoint, it's kind of like beauty's in the eye of the beholder. You look for certain things, but not everybody has everything. Very few guys in my time, either at Harvard or Notre Dame, where you're like, I have 100% certainty of that guy. I can probably count from a defensive midfield or LSM standpoint, probably less than 5 guys where you're like, that guy's going to play every game of his 4-year career. A lot of them, you're like, all right, they have something that you maybe is not great. Can you coach that into them? Can you coach it out of them? For me, you have to have a certain level of athleticism for sure, because you can't move that needle too much. You can do all the ladder work you want. You're probably not. It's not going to make you, an NFL running back. And so,
Right.
so figuring out which things you can modify within the scope of someone's skill set, that's what you're trying to guess. And then you look for pieces of the way guys can come together. And you look at guys that I've coached and recruited over the last 15 years, it's all shapes and sizes. But what all of them I felt had a great ability to become a great off-ball defender, which I think is the most critical skill.
Is that smarts or speed off ball, or both?
Smarts or speed?
Is it smarts or speed to be a good off ball defender?
It's efficiency of movement. There are guys who are fast, but who can't process. And if you can't process, it doesn't matter how fast you move, because your processing speed, if it's slow, it's going to slow you down. So as a result, a guy who's a solid athlete but has high processing speed and ability to spatially see things that are about to happen, that guy looks like an elite athlete. A guy who does the pro shuttle in 4.5 seconds and can run the 40 in 4.8, but who's a box of rocks, that guy looks slower than dirt.
Right.
So the process, a certain level of athleticism is essential. Processing and off-ball IQ can make that guy look elite, just like it can make an elite athlete look pedestrian if he doesn't have it.
I asked the question because I hear all the time, especially at lower level U.S. lacrosse events, that the tall kids are defensemen, the fast kids are attacks, and the in-between kids are midfielders. I see more kids at the high school level now that are not 6'3" as a long stick or as a defender, and I got a kid that's he's a short, boxy kid, but he's such a smart player. He doesn't get beat because he plays to his limitations, and I think that's something that has evolved a little bit more over the last few years.
listen, one year in 2011, I had a first team All-American defenseman, Kevin Ridgway, who's 6'6". And then we had a 5'7", third team All-American, Andrew Irving. So, I think I don't like homogenous. I like a little difference, and you try not to focus on size if guys are just getting stuff done, they're just getting it done. And so there's room for all of that. If, ironically, I don't necessarily like defensemen that look like me. I don't 6'4", 200-pound guys. I haven't. There haven't been many of those who played a lot for me at Notre Dame. Eddie Glazner was one. Kevin Ridgway was one. But mostly the guys who got on the field and became really, really good, PLL, MLL captains, All-Americans, were guys who were typically in that 5'9" to 6'1", 6'2" window, which is a pretty big window.
Right.
When you start getting off that, that's very tempting. And with early recruiting, a 6'4" guy guarding a 5'6" guy, the 6'4" guy is going to win that every time.
Yeah.
But he's not necessarily going to win it in the future, I guess is my point.
When you look at student athletes, talk a little bit about your philosophy as related to, I play 3 sports. The other kid only plays lacrosse. Does that play into any of your discussion?
That whole argument makes me want to throw Frisbee my computer out the window. It's such a simplistic thing. Guys my age or older, or guys my age or younger, 35-year-old guys, getting up on some pulpit around, we want multi-sport athletes, and they're banging their desk. And you're like, for these 35-year-old guys, tell me how many kids you have. How many kids you have in high school? How busy is your schedule? How busy is your professional life? How demanding is that on your son? We're representing an elite school, and he's supposed to play 3 sports to impress me? I had children that went through all of this. Playing 3 sports is really hard because all the seasons overlap. They get no break in their body. This sport A coach hates sports B coach, and they're fighting all the time because they're the most jealous girlfriend that they've ever met because they want their time. They want their mind and body 24/7. And so these guys get up there. If it's someone who's older than me, it's like, I want the 3-sport athlete, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, when the guy who's 65, when you were in high school, you rode your bike to school, you rode it back, you rode to practice. You had probably a month break in between all your sports. So, of course, you can beat that drum. That world changed. These 35-year-olds, 30-year-old assistant coaches on some of these recruiting panels talking about, we only want the multi-sport athlete. I'm like, shut the hell up. What do you know? You have no kids. You have no perspective. You're just regurgitating something you heard that sounded interesting. My philosophy on the multi-sport athlete is, it's your life. It's your body. I went to high school already. Don't do it because you're trying to impress me. Do it because you love it. You love your teammates. You love your coach. You found a way to balance school and all these demands and all these things. If you can do that, great. But my kids got to a point where they couldn't do it. And I didn't make them do it because, I went to high school already. And I don't live their schedule. They do. So whatever they do, whatever you do, make sure you're happy doing it. That's my whole mentality on that.
We always make the argument, if you work 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week and all of a sudden your boss asks you to work 70, the Federation a couple of years ago said that if a kid plays 2 sports, does his homework, and has a normal family life and school life, that he's essentially working a 68-hour week. Well, if you're working a 68-hour week and you had to do that at work, you'd say you're probably overworked. So I certainly get the premise.
Yeah, that's such a simplistic argument that it drives me insane. Obviously, I don't have any strong feelings about it.
There's been some resurgence with the Ivy League. Maybe talk a little bit about Harvard and maybe a little bit about what's happening within the Ivy League, because obviously with Yale's success, you guys are really starting to sort of turn the corner and get back to the elite status that they were for a long time. So what's going on with the Ivy League first, and then maybe talk specifically about what you're trying to do at Harvard.
Well, I think there's always, the history of the league. and the most of the schools that comprise the league are elite aspirational universities. So they should always have some level of prominence within lacrosse, because when the sport started, they were really good. And now as it's broadened and become more democratic and more, more and more state schools and more, leagues, yeah, it becomes harder and harder to be good. But, pretty consistently we have 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 teams in the top 15. And we're, our goal is to join that community. And so, the league is going to attract people who understand and appreciate the value of the education that the league can provide. Harvard is fortunate, as the oldest university in our country, oldest by about 70 years, is, Harvard's been around a long time. They've been playing lacrosse here since 1881, and with moments of quality, but in general, pretty consistently just okay. And so we're trying to get in the conversation. Yale over the last 10 years, slowly but surely, kind of methodically inched its way into being a top 5 program. Cornell is always, was one of the preeminent teams in the 70s and 80s, had some ups and downs, and they're trying to get back. They've had some seminal players that have helped there. Penn had a great season last year. So, Princeton, obviously, with Coach Tierney's success, they're trying to find a way to get back there. And so, our program has nowhere to go but up within that league. And so that's what we're trying to build. We're trying to tap into people's understanding about what Harvard represents culturally and intellectually and academically, and that aspiration to get there, with the energy that our staff is putting against telling the story of the history of Harvard, but also the hope and what we're building here as a program. And as a result, our recruiting, even just in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks since September 1st, all of the work that we've done for the last 13 months has come into fruition. The best players in the country that are good students and aspire to be at a place like Harvard, we're in the conversation. We're in the top 3 of every conversation with every kid in the country. So that's a good sign for us for the future.
Corrigan on your coaching staff, Will's coaching with you. You had a lot of autonomy at Notre Dame under Kevin to run the defense. Do you give as a defensive-minded coach, you give your offensive-minded coach the same freedom that you had at Notre Dame?
100%. It's why you hire people. You can't control everything, and you may know a lot, but you never know everything. And so, and I feel the same way about defense. Our volunteer coach was an All-American goalie at Wesleyan University. I'm teaching him kind of my methodology around defense, and offensive guys. Coach Corrigan's is our offensive assistant for Coach Hutchinson, but he's also a face-off coordinator. So we have an offensive coordinator, a face-off coordinator. I'm the defensive coordinator, and a goalie coordinator. So we're all, but we all share and overlap. So someone has ultimate quality control. But even for me, I'm trying to learn new things. I have a 24-year-old defensive assistant, and I want him to come to me with ideas, and I want to give him responsibility. And but conversely to your question, yeah, I don't stick my head too close into the offensive stuff, because I know that those guys are working at it. It doesn't mean I don't have the ability to insert myself or feel strongly about something and tell them that I want to see something. But I try not to do that unless I have good reason or good logic, and I can explain to them why. So, yes, I give them the same leeway and license and rope that I was given at Notre Dame.
Couple quick questions before we finish. There's some conversation both at the NCAA and at AUS Lacrosse that with the pandemic, you are going to look at, instead of having face-offs, maybe doing alternate possession just to sort of keep kids healthy. Any thoughts on that?
It'll be interesting to see what they keep on tweaking the face-offs a little bit. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where they abolish the face-off. I just don't. Unless a couple of guys come along in the next 5 years that become as iconic as Baptiste in Ireland, a couple of those guys who just won at an absurd level. That means you got two guys who are murdering everybody. So that potentially could create a voting block of people that say, maybe one person shouldn't control the outcome of a game like that. And so until that happens, and I don't think so, but I think some of the new rules with the stand-up neutral grip and some of the things around that could democratize the face-off a little bit. We'll see.
Did taking the spring off hurt or help Harvard? I mean, it hurt everybody, but I mean, that's kind of your first year.
I think it hurt. The momentum that we had, the culture we were building, the excitement, But you're right, it did hurt everybody. Who does it hurt more? Who knows?
Yeah.
That's a debate that'll never be resolved. But I think particularly the teams that were either finally putting it together and maybe had an iconic player, that really hurts. A program like ours that was just starting to we're on a runway and we're just starting to kind of build into taking off. That hurts us because we lose those guys, we lose that momentum. But everybody in between gets hurt because you're never going to know what that season held. And that'll be forever incomplete and unresolved. And so it's hard to say. And, it hurts everybody.
NCAA's pushed off.
That's debatable.
NCAA's pushed off any recruiting until January 1st at this point in terms of in school visits.
Yeah, I think so. The dead period's going to go to January.
And you get some time to kind of look through. You still are able to do visits with Zoom and I'm assuming phone calls and emails, right?
Yep. Can't do anything in person. So no in-person evaluations, no in-person recruiting and all that stuff. So
we're good. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time, and you're a great defensive coach, and you've always been very generous with your time, and I do appreciate it. This is the first show we're doing. We'll see how it goes. And again, Gerry, thank you so much for everything, and I hope that you get to the promised land because you deserve the work that all the work you put into the sport. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and all the best, and good luck with your show and your program.
Thanks very much, Gerry. You have a good one, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.